Hi everyone, Jason here from QA Cafe, and thank you for joining today's webinar on increasing your DOCSIS testing throughput using CDRouter. I'm here with Matt Langlois, our CDRouter product manager and testing guru, and he'll be here to answer any questions you have as we go along. So what are we going to talk about today? First, I want to go over the basic parts of a DOCSIS system beyond the physical layer negotiation that happens when a cable modem comes online. That means both the DOCSIS provisioning system and the ongoing troubleshooting and monitoring systems used in DOCSIS deployments. These setups are complex and can be tough to implement reliably in a lab environment, especially if you're sharing resources with other people in the lab or other people in your organization. Secondly, I want to go over CDRouter's DOCSIS add-on and how it simulates both the DOCSIS provisioning system and the ongoing management systems. This includes its mechanism for building DOCSIS config files automatically. Then I want to go over how the automation of these systems can help you speed up your DOCSIS testing much faster than trying to build this environment manually. That includes combining the simulation with DOCSIS-specific test cases and with test cases from our other modules to fully test your CM or your eRouter in kind of a continuous, repeatable test runs. And then lastly, I'll go over some of the specific test exercises you can do when using CDRouter DOCSIS on your CM or eRouter device under test. So let's examine the parts of a DOCSIS system. These are the things you need when testing either a cable modem, eRouter, or a device under test that contains both. Setting them up in the lab can be complicated because there are many different network services that have to be provisioned beyond the physical layer negotiation that happens between the CM and the CMTS. Now, granted, there's some CMTS out there that will also simulate the provisioning services, but it's not common, and so we want to eliminate variables in testing. So we divide the DOCSIS network setup conceptually into two pieces. The DOCSIS provisioning system contains the systems necessary to get the cable modem on board and configured to achieve IP connectivity and then connect to the basic services. So that includes a DHCP server, either for IPv4 or IPv6, that contains specific vendor options that point the CM at the time of day server for synchronization and the TFTP server from which the CM will get its configuration file. And once these things are configured, the config file also may have information about further management and monitoring services that the CM should connect to or the eRouter should connect to, like SNMP network management systems servers, or a TR69 auto configuration server, or a log server as it is defined in the DOCSIS specification. One other thing to note, if you're building a whole simulation of the end user's network environment, you'll also want to have LAN-side hosts, both wired and wireless, to help test the eRouter's higher layer functions and interfaces, and making sure that user activity itself is being simulated to do some of these higher layer application tests. Now, many people have probably built some of these systems before for use in your own lab, where you're using a setup that is matching a provider setup, but there's some caveats to this. So for starters, it requires that you are building these services specific to a DOCSIS environment. So a simple DHCP server won't do. You'll have to, it must be configured in a way to provide the correct DHCP options in either DHCP or DHCP v6 format to the cable modem. It also requires having access to a production TR69 ACS or SNMP NMS that is set up to recognize, connect to, and communicate with the CM and the eRouter. These things can be hard to acquire and maintain, particularly in an environment where you are sharing access to a CMTS and other network resources with other teams. So these shared resources also introduce additional variables, making it difficult to test in isolation and reduce the environmental factors that will affect repeatable testing. So this lack of isolation also makes it difficult to change the configuration of network services to tailor them to the specific thing that you're trying to test. So this also applies to the DOCSIS configurations themselves. Having the TFTP system set up manually and the DOCSIS config files conveyed via DHCP make it difficult to switch between config files over many test iterations when you are trying to test particular pieces of the configuration, or change the test environment to meet a certain service level. So, and lastly, without something that actually simulates the LAN hosts, like we mentioned, there's no automation here, and it's difficult to do scaling and performance testing. To sort of solve these issues, we built CDRouter DOCSIS, the DOCSIS add-on, to handle these scenarios, and also to bring CDRouter's automation platform to bear when testing CM and eRouter devices specifically. So CDRouter DOCSIS takes control over most of these services, so they are simulated during test time. And this lets you adjust them on a per package basis to tailor them to your test environment. So in this setup, CDRouter simulates the services necessary to provision the cable modem, including DHCP, time of day, and the TFTP server that is holding the device configuration. And then once the DOCSIS config is used and the baseline connectivity is made, CDRouter simulates the other management services necessary, like TR69 ACS, SNMP, as well as the rest of the broadband network environment and applications. It also builds, like we said, the simulated wired and wireless hosts to exercise the device under test from the LAN. So how does this work during a test run? The cable modem provisioning happens during startup. So the CDRouter has a base startup sequence, and this is based on the configuration settings in your CDRouter config. And during startup, CDRouter creates two different DHCP servers, and one of them is on the simulated DOCSIS network specifically for the CM to receive its address and the specialized DHCP options. And in those options is the TFTP server, and the TFTP server then serves a configuration file that is either preloaded and pointed at the CDRouter config, or built within the CDRouter config file. So you can either have your own DOCSIS config file that you use and have that running on CDRouter, and then the TFTP server will serve that to the CM. Or you can use CDRouter's config system to sections, basically test-vars in a CDRouter config to design a DOCSIS config file that will be generated from those test-vars at runtime. And then lastly, CDRouter turns up either an SNMP NMS, a TR69 ACS, or both, depending on your network setup and add-ons. And then it allows the eRouter to connect to them. So I want to show you kind of so we have a capture of the startup process here. I just wanted to show you what's happening when CDRouter does this. So you can see the DHCP requests go out. You see the time of day server request and response go out. You see the request to the TFTP and the response there. And then you see DNS startup, and the DHCP process finishes, and then the rest of startup. So this is happening in the startup procedure of CDRouter. This is the very first thing that CDRouter does before it runs any tests. So it is literally building the DOCSIS test environment on a per package basis. So whenever you start up CDRouter to run these tests, it's going to go through this process. So using CDRouter to handle the DOCSIS setup has several advantages. Specifically the config files, the most powerful being that it greatly increases the amount of testing that you can do. Since you have the config files associated with particular test packages, you can build different test mixes to work with the configuration files you've set, and then schedule all of them to be run accordingly. So you never have to touch the CDRouter test setup to run through any number of different test scenarios with different DOCSIS config files. So this opens the door for a number of test exercises that we recommend and have tried out on our own DOCSIS devices here in the lab. So for starters, we've taken some of the common CDRouter test modules and reconfigured them specifically for CM or eRouter scenarios. For example, our firewall and Nmap test cases are DOCSIS-specific modules that can be run against the CM interface for security testing. And then similarly with SNMP, if you have the SNMP add-on, our DOCSIS test cases will walk the MIBs specific to the DOCSIS specification. Along those lines, once the eRouter is connected to the CDRouter TR69 ACS, you can include TR69 test cases in your test package to run a full suite of TR69 testing after the CM and eRouter have been provisioned to connect and are online sort of all in one step. So CDRouter will go through the DOCSIS startup process, the CM will get its address, the eRouter will come online. Within the DOCSIS config file, it will tell how to connect to a TR69 ACS, the eRouter will connect to the TR69 ACS, and then you can go through and do your normal TR69 testing against the device. One of the things we like to do when both SNMP and TR69 are implemented is check the data integrity between the two protocols. Oddly enough, a device under test may maintain different data stores for configuration or statistical information for SNMP and TR69 for whatever reason. And you can test, so you can test both of these together to make sure that the information given by one management interface, either configuration information or statistic information, is the same as it would be provided through the other management interface. And obviously those things should be the same. So this is also useful for later too, with some of the up and coming configuration protocols that still make use of the device to data model, like the user services platform or WebPA, which is one of the things being built as part of the RDK deployments. And then finally, when you have power over the DOCSIS configs, you can also change service level settings and then test to make sure that those service level settings are adhered to. So for example, you can set the bandwidth limits in DOCSIS config. So, if the service level agreement is 50 megabits down and up, you can set those in the DOCSIS config and then use CDRouter performance to ensure the rates are capped at what was set. Or you can do MAC limiting. So if in this DOCSIS config you set it so that only 3 or 4 different MAC addresses can connect through the system, you set that up in the DOCSIS config, and then you can use CDRouter to scale that and make sure that that any additional hosts are blocked before going through that. So you're kind of verifying these general service level things and being able to run them repeatably. All right, well, that is kind of the short and sweet of it. That's our basic overview of the DOCSIS test environment and sort of what the whole reason we built CDRouter DOCSIS for, to make running tests for CMs and eRouters significantly easier. Even if you have already put some time and effort into building DOCSIS test setup, we really think that kind of switching over to this fully automated system that simulates the entire network can really speed up your work and make it less dependent on you relying on some of the other lab resources or shared resources. I just wanted to kind of reiterate what what it is that we sort of built DOCSIS, CDRouter DOCSIS for. We wanted to make it easier to configure and manage setting up a DOCSIS test environment, and that includes automating automating the use of DOCSIS config files, making it simple, making it portable and small. So if you're using kind of a smaller CMTS, and you need to move it to a different area or a different area of your lab, you can do that. And then also having it self-contained, so you're not necessarily relying on a lot of shared resources that are going to be difficult for you to configure in between test runs, and that aren't isolated, so that you don't necessarily know what's being changed about them. That might cause problems during your testing, and sort of keeping it consistent, reliable, and keeping kind of a static test setup to make sure that you get repeatable results. So if you have any more questions, always feel free to email us at support@qacafe.com, and we will get back to some of you on some of these questions with some more complex answers. And I hope that you can all join us for our next webinar, which is hopefully going to be our team giving you some their favorite tips and tricks with CDRouter. All right, that's all we have, so enjoy the rest of your day.